For me, the ordering of monsters based on their coolness factor is vampires, werewolves, witches, Shreks, ghosts, then zombies, mummies, Frankensteins, and other ghouls at some lower tiers. In general, who doesn't love some classic monster goodness, especially this time of year? Werewolves have been high up for me ever since I rented and rewatched Goosebumps Werewolf of Fever Swamp like 300 times as a kid.
I just think they're neat.
How's it going, everyone? My name's Graham and welcome to Two Left Frames. I'll start out spoiler-free and will warn you ahead of diving into things more deeply. We just had the release of Marvel's first special feature presentation, Werewolf by Night. When I first booted this up, I was actually looking at my phone during the opening studio credits. Since they play this excessively long fanfare in front of everything, I've unknowingly become conditioned to tune it out. As soon as it switched to black and white and took on those horror vibes, I was hooked. I set my phone down and didn't take my eyes off the screen for the remainder of the special. This thing has style in a way I've sorely been missing from Marvel. While it's been a little bit rocky in its transition, Phase 4 has had some of the most director freedom out of the studio yet. Regardless of what you thought of these individual movies, you can't tell me that Shang-Chi, Eternals, and Multiverse of Madness didn't have distinct stamps put on them by their directors. I want more of that, and this gives me hope. These specials feel like a natural evolution of their one-shots, something they haven't done for many years now. What if we gave them an actual budget to work with? Let some creative teams run wild in these separate corners, but actually make the characters and story matter to the larger universe. Hell yeah. I hope they put out like 2 or 3 things in this format every single year. Experiment, shake it up. Give risky choices the opportunity to write and direct these things. Hell, make a couple of them R-rated. This is a sandbox, and I really hope they take advantage of that long term. I have no idea why they didn't wait for She-Hulk to wrap up its first season and release this closer to Halloween in the gap between She-Hulk and Wakanda Forever. When I opened up Disney Plus, I had to go searching for it. Why wasn't it front and center? It's just a shame they don't seem to be treating Werewolf at Night as it deserved. But hopefully the fan response will encourage them to take more risks. I have zero prior exposure to Marvel's take on the werewolf, but basically everything new I learned made me more and more excited for this project. Starting with learning this werewolf's human name is Jack Russell. That's right. Just like the dog. That's somehow more absurd and more funny to me than something like Harley Quinn's real name being Harleen Quinzel. The Vanisher is Telford Porter, or Rainbow Rider being Roy G. Bivolo. There are endless examples. It's funny every time, except for when characters directly address it.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
Wait, no, seriously, what's your actual name?
I think attempting to wink at something that was never meant to be taken seriously zaps the fun out of it. So instead, I want us to go quietly laugh in the corner that this werewolf is named Jack Russell, and I hope they never address it directly, even though they almost certainly will someday. The ramp of my excitement for this special built so slowly. I learned it was being directed by Michael Giacchino. I wasn't sure how to feel since he's primarily a composer, but in that medium, he's consistently done amazing work with Matt Reeves, who I love, and most recently, blowing me away with what may now be my all-time favorite comic book movie soundtrack with The Batman. And I'd like to hope that he had learned a bit about directing along the way, working with masters of the craft like Matt Reeves. Marvel hasn't really experimented much with format since WandaVision. I've been wanting more formula breaks. Letting Giacchino do whatever he wanted on a small side project like this was such a smart way to test out his abilities behind the camera. Having him both directing and composing this special allowed him to put a really distinct personal stamp on it that left me hopeful we'll see more from him. Recently, Bassam Tariq exited as the director for Blade, and now there's been even more production issues, recently delaying the movie entirely, but if they're smart, I think they'll turn around and hire Giacchino for the job. Black and white can often feel like a gimmick, with other comic book movies slapping it on after the fact. There was the black and white Snyder Cut or Logan Noir. But when used properly, it can create some of the most evocative images in cinema. So I was thrilled to hear black and white was a conscious choice this time, being shot with it in mind, properly tributing classic creature features and using that limited color palette to its fullest extent. Next, in my sequential education of all things Werewolf by Night, I learned one of the creators of the character is named Mike Ploog. That had no bearing on my interest in this project, I just think that is a wonderful name. If they told me this werewolf's name was Mike Ploog, I would have a harder time believing it than Jack Russell. Ploog. Never gets old. Considering the lead character is a werewolf, one thing I didn't even know I wanted was a commitment to practical effects and costumes. Considering they barely even do practical costumes these days, I just never thought they'd go that direction for a werewolf. This aired at the same time as She-Hulk, where they probably could have just done forced perspective shots in most of it. I'm all the more grateful they went this route. Making physical costumes and avoiding unnecessary green screen is exactly what Marvel needs. And here, we've proven it can be done with style and flair and on a budget. So maybe they'll actually start course correcting their overuse of CGI. Here's hoping, but I'm not gonna hold my breath. Top it all off with a monster hunter named Elsa Bloodstone. And no, I'm not playing up the name thing again. I think that is legitimately the coolest name, and I already want a full Elsa Bloodstone series, done in a way that's 50% Buffy the Vampire Slayer and 50% Netflix's Castlevania. I seriously think this character has the potential to be a fan favorite moving forward. They just need a little bit more time to develop her. And speaking of Buffy, it actually reminds me of another practical werewolf costume that didn't work out quite so well. As you would expect, the musical composition in this is fantastic, and to my surprise, the directing was excellent as well. Giacchino managed to capture the creature feature essence without lifting directly from what came before, and that alone makes this worth the attention of both Marvel and classic horror film fans alike. I really enjoyed the new characters and their portrayals. Introducing these monsters opens up what could be a huge new corner of the MCU. I'm still pretty confident they're paving the way for a Midnight Suns movie. Werewolf by Night showed a willingness to be bloodier than ever, even if that's only thanks to outdated censorship practices that don't seem to count blood if it isn't red. And it reminded me that Marvel is at its best when it sticks to a genre and layers a superpowered character into it. We've had a spy thriller meets Captain America, sitcoms meet Wanda Maximoff, and now classic horror meets Jack Russell. They've done this half-heartedly here and there, but the best results are always the ones that break further away from the norm. And knowing that this is horror-influenced, I know people will ask, there are between 0 and 2 jump scares, it really depends how susceptible you are, but neither of the borderline jump scare examples are scary at all. So if that's not your jam and would be a singular reason to not watch this, you're still probably gonna be safe. The little jumps are short and not really rooted in anything scary. It's more of just a spooky atmosphere. While I'm hugely in favor of this atypical format doing the special feature presentation, I do think it screamed out to be 15 to 20 minutes longer. And maybe they should have just made it a tight 90-minute movie. I actually think more people would probably tune into it if it were sold that way. But regardless, as it is, it has a full endorsement from me. It is the first fully fresh and different thing Marvel has done in I don't know how long. Wait for the sun to go down, turn out the lights, and treat yourself. I think people will be pleasantly surprised. And while I suggest you watch the show now and then come back for the spoiler portion of the video, for anyone who's not quite yet convinced, I'll give you a very short plot summary. Things start off with an introduction to the Bloodstone family. Think of the Belmonts in Castlevania. They have been a monster hunting family for generations. And now that the patriarch Ulysses Bloodstone has passed, a group of hunters have been summoned to participate in a hunt to determine who will receive the Bloodstone, which itself is a powerful relic used to fight and control monsters. The relic is fastened to the monster they are hunting, and they are set loose in a labyrinthine battle royale where they're both trying to kill each other and avoid being killed by the big monster. Come on, you have to be intrigued now, right? So from here on, I'm assuming everyone has seen it themselves, full spoilers ahead. I'm discussing every nitty-gritty detail. Let's look at these characters, starting from the most minor and working our way up. Obviously, the best of the bunch was Billy Swan, the silly little assistant who somehow manages to survive through all the carnage. I actually love the idea of this nervous little guy filling in as Elsa's eventual Alfred moving forward. That could be used to such great effect. I want to spend a 10-episode season with her and Billy here, reclaiming the family name while reviving the Monster of the Week show format. The idea of Ulysses Bloodstone turning his own corpse into this animatronic carnival attraction is so freaky and delightfully ghoulish. I never quite got a grasp on whether or not he's actually embodying this thing or if it's just a recording. Either way, I think it's dope, and both the voice acting and puppeteering work really well together. This one line, however,
I'll be rotting for you,
felt a little out of place. I'm down for them to include that camp of classic horror flicks, but when it's just one line, it feels a little half-hearted or underexplored. I just think that and this character could have been used more effectively. Make zombie Ulysses this recurring presence, and they could put the full burden of those campy Tales from the Crypt vibes on him, watching over the hunt and commentating alongside his wicked wife. Speaking of, Harriet Harris is a delight as the widowed Verussa Bloodstone. She's hamming things up, chewing the scenery non-stop. Just listen to this delivery.
You'll wanna see this, darling.
I primarily knew her as BB growing up watching Frasier with my parents, or as Mrs. Jankus in Memento. She's a character actress I've seen in many things who's been crying out for an opportunity like this, and man oh man did she ever make it worthwhile. Then there are something like 4 monster hunters that are never even named, and barely have lines of dialogue. Come on, you're gonna give me a 6-foot-tall monster hunting David Bowie lookalike with a sword and only give her like one line? Spending just a couple more minutes with these characters as they were first assembled would have helped out a lot. They don't need to be fully rounded, save the characterizations for Elsa and Jack. But they could have taught us anything about them and used their presence to show us something important about the leading characters. Make me care a little bit more about everyone's stake in all this, beyond these hunters being fodder for some kills. And mind you, those kills were pretty amazing. Shooting a dude in the head with his own severed arm and wrist crossbow, then smothering his dying breaths while you try to hide. Or knocking this guy down and slicing his throat, embedding a sword 6 inches into her skull. That's all bloody, visceral, and just plain cool. I wouldn't change a second of that. But it might as well have all been happening to faceless goons. Now, onto the actual main characters. Elsa Bloodstone shows up looking like Jessica Jones, as well as sharing much of her cynical attitude, then fighting like Black Widow. So they left themselves a bit of a mountain to climb to make her feel distinct. And with the shortened runtime, I'm not really sure they achieved that. We are told that she's forsaken her family's hunter training, and we see that she's confident, dismissive, snide, slow to trust, and extremely capable. That's a decent starting point for a character, and maybe the most they could have done with this runtime. There was at least enough there for me to latch onto, and I'm already looking forward to whatever her next appearance might be. Please Please give me Marvel's Elsa the Vampire Slayer. And finally, Jack himself. I've only seen Gael Garcia Bernal in M. Night's Old and heard him in Coco before this. But I'm quickly becoming a fan. He has some really great energy here. Jack is quietly yet confidently a nice and sensitive guy. He's got this lovable bashfulness. Add in the fact that he's friends with monsters, and Jack reminds me of Newt Scamander, without the crippling social anxiety. He appears to be more comfortable around Ted than he does the other hunters. He doesn't even attempt to fight back and would rather try to help Elsa than abandon someone who in all likelihood is gonna try and kill him and his friend. This is a character I can quickly and easily get on board with. There's an easily apparent on-screen chemistry between Gail and Laura Donnelly that makes me want to see them together again soon. What made Jack especially compelling is when he hints at the horrors of his curse. The tears are welling up in his eyes, and he chokes back the memory of those he's hurt. You can feel the depth of his sorrow and grief. In this single, despairing scene, they basically did more to explore the duality of his character than they did across the entirety of the Infinity Saga with Hulk. Jack trying to remember Elsa's scent before changing, only to recall the last time he tried, left me eager to learn more about his tragic backstory. There was such a desperation to it, with zero confidence the sniffing would actually work. I'm excited by the prospect that moving forward he could be a killer werewolf, but keeps that bottled up and is instead the resident monster expert. They've found like one or two good excuses for Bruce Banner to help out, but at the end of the day he usually has to switch to Hulk to really contribute, and they never really play up that conflict. I want to see Jack be capable and contribute as himself, avoiding becoming the werewolf at all costs. Elsa would be the brawn, but she doesn't care about her family's history and never learned all the strengths and weaknesses of monsters. So Jack is trying his best to distill that information for her while avoiding getting himself killed. Done right, they're bound to make a great team moving forward. And I'll talk about the actual werewolf after covering one last major character. That would of course be Ted. At first I thought the name reveal felt like some cheeseball gag. Then I looked it up and realized Ted is a comic-accurate name for the man who eventually became Man-Thing. So I'm totally into them humanizing this creature by using his proper name. Jack and Man-Thing together remind me of Han and Chewie. I'm always a sucker for the trope of a big monster being a secret softie, and they did a good job of not making their friendship feel too derivative. Plus, he has this insane power to immolate people he touches. I have no idea what all Ted can do, but I must see more. He burnt up Verussa, then softballed her into her husband's corpse. Damn, dude! And this design looks lifted straight from the comic book pages. It's somehow even more convincing in color, where he looks like the bed of a swamp brought to life, just as he should. Man-Thing's scale, weight, movement, and presence all felt exceptional. I had to go look this up. The character is 100% CGI, but they built an animatronic physical representation of the character that they could have present on their real built sets.
You know, we thought if we can get away with it in some shots, great, but it was really referenced to check lighting, to check position, to check size and scale and all of those things.
So while not truly a man in a suit, I think the results speak for themselves.
Because the one thing I did not want, but I just didn't want somebody with a stick and a tennis ball on the end going, hey, look at this, that's the monster.
Hopefully an approach like this becomes the norm moving forward, so that they stop relying on CGI teams to create costumes after the fact, literally painting over actors in post. This looks so good because it's mostly practical for a change. If Man-Thing ever comes back, which I'm certain he will, I will actually riot if they take shortcuts and compromise this flawless vision. Looking at the filmmaking and craftsmanship of Werewolf by Night, Small touches throughout go a long way. The Twilight Zone-esque narration pulled me in immediately. They brought in actor Rick D. Wasserman, who has a stage background, and you can tell, he's selling it. They even include the cues in the top right to signal it's time for a real change. A simple but effective trick to harken back to those older films. So much care was put into this special. I absolutely got the impression that Giacchino would have or could have taken it much further, but made the most of his limited runtime and budget. The opening theme is fantastic, and while much of the soundtrack is played off more subtly to stay true to its genre inspiration, when it lets loose, it's some of the best scoring to ever come out of the MCU. The competition is sadly kind of weak in that regard, and I'm still cracking up that he titled his horror revision of the Marvel Studios opening theme as main title. Half the songs here have silly pun titles like that, and the best song with the best title is probably Werewolf, that acts as both the reveal and theme music for the werewolf. The score doesn't hit the same levels as the Batman, but that's probably an unreasonable bar to set, as that score is basically perfect. And I already think this one stands well above his other MCU contributions. And from a directing perspective, I appreciated the overall slower, more atmospheric pace. Spacing things out like this really lets the action shine, and the climax truly feels climactic. I would have preferred a little more time spent leading up to the hunt with their weird occult rituals. What we were shown of that really got the imagination running. As things progress, there's this grab bag of amazing visual moments and wonderful choices left and right. Like when they're laying out this altar and deciding who will enter the maze first. Better draw selections out of a literal skull, and once selected, march down a path alongside this dude with a flaming tuba to announce your arrival. And this first shot panning to reveal the labyrinth? Amazing. The music for that is equally great. Ever since an old episode of Batman the Animated Series, I've had an affinity for deadly mazes. They even sound the tuba off in the distance before showing each individual hunter stalking through the maze, creeping around, dripping with fear. I will praise this special up and down for building actual sets. But that limitation cut some really intriguing elements short. We only ever see like 3 rooms of this maze, and Verussa told them that they cannot take any weapons and can instead only use those hidden around the garden. But then they all find their weapon of choice off screen, and that limitation never really matters again. I would have loved to have seen some medieval assassin John Wick madness with hunters running around this place in a true battle royale. Layer in some labyrinth traps that kill a few extra no-name hunters off, and we'd really get this party started. The skirmishes that do occur are really great, and the threat of them feels high. So I can't fault what they did. I simply wanted to see more of the danger and carnage that it felt like it was hinting at. Now is a good time to get back to the werewolf transformation. After they've dealt with the maze, freed Ted, and retrieved the Bloodstone, it's revealed to everyone else that Jack himself is a monster, not a hunter. His plea in the cage to be killed on the spot is harrowing. He's dedicated himself to containing this monster and protecting others. Letting the wolf loose again and risking harm to these strangers who would just as soon kill him is his worst nightmare. I mean this with the utmost sincerity. This werewolf transformation scene is one of the coolest things Marvel has ever done, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. There is nothing better to me than a good reaction shot or a well-done on-screen transformation, and here we got both. There are things that the human mind cannot readily comprehend, and it's so much more effective to show that horror in someone's eyes than attempt to capture what they're witnessing. Letting my imagination paint in the worst it can imagine, combined with stellar sound design and these flashing silhouettes over Elsa as she huddles in fear, is enthralling. And while I generally love a good transformation scene, I especially love werewolf transformations. My favorites have been An American Werewolf in London, which is a classic, and, rather unironically, the first transformation in 2004's Van Helsing. I've always loved the concept that rather than literally transforming, he's shedding the human skin to reveal he is the wolf underneath. And now, Werewolf by Night might actually be a contender for one of the best of all time. And they managed to do so without showing any of it at all. That's horror perfection. I'm such a fan of how careful they were with revealing the werewolf. There's so much build-up before we get a proper full shot of the design, and it's so worth it. And the black and white is used incredibly effectively when he's finally revealed, keeping much of it in shadow. In this tense build-up, I noticed his glowy eyes up there like half a second before he leapt down, and when he stands posing in all his glory with that amazing musical sting, I had to resist the urge to give it a 19-minute standing ovation in my living room just to show those Venice film dorks how it's done. The practical werewolf costume is excellent, right until the very end where it holds on his face in full light. It looks maybe a little too rubbery there. I think it's because Gale just showed us how emotive he can be, and then his obvious inability to fully move his face in this costume largely washes out his performance. But overall, this costume is still like a 9 out of 10 from me. I'm so happy they went practical for these big monster characters, keeping them both so close to the comics. Sandwiched in between some moments of really high praise, I have one nitpicky gripe that took me out of things, and that was Jack and his little futuristic grenade. When he clumsily triggers it, they sprint away as if there's a ticking time bomb. Because there literally is. Then instead, he does this weird slapstick routine for what feels like ages, just continually replacing this bomb on the wall. Shouldn't this thing have blown up within like 5 seconds of being triggered, not 4 entire minutes later? That doesn't seem very useful in a pinch. I figured I'd slip that in before truly gushing. Ending everything with a final, gory 5 minutes of the werewolf ripping apart goons while Elsa wrecks the remaining hunters was pure spectacle in the best possible way. I'm obsessed with the way they have the werewolf sprinting around and fighting with a brawling, animalistic ferocity. There are no martial arts techniques or finesse on display, just pure power and rage. The single take sequence of the werewolf pouncing around, killing everyone was so well done. I loved how blood repeatedly splattered on the lens, griming things up while selling the viciousness of it all. I have to wonder if Michael was inspired by the Batman's big single take fight after scoring that film. And as a Mortal Kombat fan, there was only one thing I could think when Elsa finished off Verussa. Finally, the way they let the color seep back into the world was a cool effect and a great reveal that this whole thing did take place in modern times. Although, we could somewhat infer that before by these random guards using things like cattle prods. Upon seeing that initial teaser, myself and many others thought these were TVA agents. I thought that even a ways into the special. What that instead tells me is that they probably should have given TVA agents a more distinct design. In hindsight, it's pretty lame that they just look like members of a SWAT team. They are the Time Variance Authority. They should probably not look identical to random goons. Anyways, this final shot of Elsa with the color, I don't think they just turned off a black and white filter. Based on how vibrant and saturated the colors feel, I suspect they may have used colorization techniques to paint color on top of black and white footage, the same way people do when they restore old black and white film. I could be wrong about that, so even if they only made it look like that rather than literally doing it, I still think it was a really cool choice. If moving forward you do choose to watch more of my comic book movie reviews, you'll quickly learn I have a soft spot for a quality end credit sequence, and I do think Werewolf by Night nailed it. The black and red look excellent together, and holy cow, Giacchino's music here is brilliant. My appreciation for what this guy can do continued to grow throughout both viewings. I'm gonna have to pay extra close attention to his other MCU soundtrack contributions when I eventually review those as well. While I wish there was a little something in the post-credits, even just a "Ted will return" message. But I do respect that they committed to keeping this so self-contained. I'll include some final thoughts and summaries as I close things out. I was impressed by the amount of gore Raimi was able to include in Multiverse of Madness, but I think Werewolf by Night takes the cake. It was so unapologetically violent. There were these headlines where Giacchino was saying, "I kept adding blood and nobody stopped me." I kinda thought that was some marketing bait and wouldn't really be true, but hot damn, they really went for it here. This special and Doctor Strange 2 are examples that together give me hope Marvel will continue to push boundaries of what a Marvel production can be. Now I'm looking to Deadpool 3 and Blade to continue pushing that forward. Deadpool 3 is already confirmed to be R-rated, so please let Giacchino direct an R-rated MCU Blade. That's all I want now. I know I'm becoming a broken record here, but I do wish it were longer. I wanted more of the manor and their weird rituals. I wanted more time spent with the hunters before the hunt began, which they could have used to teach us more about Elsa. And I especially wanted to see more of the labyrinth. Have them sneaking about, narrowly avoiding being killed through various means, and constantly finding, losing, swapping, and utilizing these scattered and specialized weapons. They obviously weren't given the time or budget for that, and I respect that this thing has no filler. It was paced out super effectively, and the big moments were given the room they needed to stand out. Besides getting smaller doses of the things I liked, the main drawback of a shortened runtime means that this special kind of lacked the ability to be about anything. What it ends up being about is introducing a few characters. There wasn't really time for more than that. We're left devoid of any full backstories or enough concrete information to really pull any larger meaning from this. Considering that, I'm surprised how much character nuance they managed to explore and achieve in spite of the limitation. And at the end of the day, the special nailed its key mandates. It's a classic monster horror tribute. It made great use of its black and white visuals. It tells a self-contained story that doesn't overstay its welcome. It got me excited about this main trio, and it left me wanting more, which is typically a good thing, but it feels like a few obvious inclusions that needed some further exploration were left by the wayside. I likely just have to adjust my expectations for what can be achieved in something the length of these special presentations. It's a lot easier to harp on a 2-hour movie that's either too short or too long, or 6 hours of TV that probably should have been more or less. One single 45-minute special? They're trying to achieve something different there. How I rank and rate something like this may change over time, depending how many of them they end up making. I expect the Guardians Holiday Special to benefit from the fact that we already know every character present, so they can instead zoom in on the characters' interpersonal relationships. I'm really looking forward to that. Werewolf by Night deserves to be seen, as it's one of the best things to come out of Phase 4 and is one of the most creative and innovative things Marvel's done in ages. And that's coming from someone who has seemingly liked the direction of Phase 4 more than most. I'm setting a pretty lofty score for this one, up at an 8.5 out of 10. I look forward to the day Moon Knight and Werewolf by Night are in the same movie so they can talk about their night-based names. I mean, so Moon Knight can use moon powers to give the werewolf super wolf powers. I'm not kidding, I do genuinely want to see that. And then they can make a joke about how both their names end in night. Although I really hope he doesn't start calling himself Werewolf by Night. That would be a crappy name. You can just stick with Jack Russell. As I continue to expand and add to this channel, I'll be re-uploading some tweaked versions of old comic book movie reviews I've already done. I thought it would be fun to try and get in on this one early, since it was on the shorter side and is very seasonal. But moving forward, I'm gonna work from the opposite end of things at the very beginning and slowly try to play catch up to where we are now. I hope you're ready to strap yourselves in for what could be a wild ride there. I'm very looking forward to the challenge. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to patrons of the channel for their support, and I hope to see you all again soon.